Welcome to the Fabricators Coach podcast, and we believe that every fabricator deserves to have a business that not only makes them money, but also gives them time to enjoy it. In each episode, our goal is to share real information that you can take action on and use today, information that, if you will use it, can help you reduce the chaos in your business, help you make more money, and help you get your life back. Well, welcome everybody here on Thursday. Appreciate y'all taking some time out of your day. Glad to have you here. We've got probably 2 dozen folks signed up. We'll get anywhere between what we have now. We may get a few more that'll show up, but we'll see how that goes. What we're going to do today is we've got kind of a unique setup. We're going to cover, as usual, our latest article out of the Slippery Rock Gazette, which you can get a copy of at fabricatorscoach.com. Select the blog item and blog menu selection and download there. Or you can go to slipperyrockgazette.net and read their current issue, and you can pick this article up. Plus, they've got a great archive set up where you can go through and read all your past articles there. So this article is from first of this month, and it's called "So You Want to Sell Your Business?" And appears we have struck a nerve somewhere. So we've got a lot of folks who are interested in talking about this and looking at this. So we're going to dive into it. The way we're set up with this is we've got basically about, there may be 30 minutes of prepared content, but this is really more of a discussion than a presentation. I've got a guest, Coker's in there with us. We'll introduce in just a minute, but this really is designed to be some peer-to-peer learning. You folks will have some questions. Some of you may have some experience along the lines of today's topic. So we'll be, doing a little bit of presentation, also asking a lot of questions. And as we ask questions, if nobody answers, I'll call on you. So get ready for that. You can run, but you can't hide. We've got we've got this set up for 60 minutes, but as usual, we'll stop at the top of the hour, and then we will just leave the meeting open for another 20 or 30 minutes in case somebody else has got some specific questions and things like that that they want to discuss, maybe one-on-one. So we do that as just a way to kind of help you out a little bit. One of the things we also do is we convert these webinars to podcasts. So we'll go through and re-listen to the recording afterwards. Anything that sounds maybe a little personal, a little confidential, we'll edit those out. So don't worry about things like that. Reason we do this, folks ask, well, why do you put the time and effort into the articles and the webinars and podcasts and all that? I truly believe that it's important that your business not only makes you money, but also gives you time to enjoy it. And the way to do that, if you're struggling with it, is to find time to work on your business and not just work in your business. And so we do these webinars to give you some suggestions on how to do that. So hopefully they're helpful for you. Before we get into the content here, let's do some introductions. And I think the first introduction really, we've got a guest co-host who also helped write the article, and it's Chase Busenbark. Chase, you want to take just a second and just introduce yourself for the folks?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ed. My name's Chase Busenbark. I come from the stone industry for my entire life. My family's owned a fabrication shop close to around the St. Louis, Missouri area for the last 22 years. And I've been fully involved up until the last couple of years. I started doing business brokerage, which is, essentially helping business owners whenever they are ready to sell their business. And that's currently what I'm doing, Ed.
Right. So you're a certified business broker, right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Great. So let's dive into the meat of this thing here. We tried to let me back up. For those of you that haven't been here before, quick introduction for me. Obviously, I'm Ed Young. I've got over 40 years experience in manufacturing, business ownership, and coaching. I've worked with literally hundreds of companies in a lot of industries, including this one. My first project in this industry was over 20 years ago. I've owned my own brick and mortar business, so I understand those of you who are owners, how lonely it can be at times as that one person on an island by yourself, having to be responsible for everything. I also ran a countertop shop for a few years, so I think I've got a pretty decent feel for the business and the industry, and I've dealt with a lot of the challenges that a lot of you folks are dealing with every day. So, again, welcome and thanks for taking time out of your Thursday. In the article, we start talking about the topic of selling your business. There's a lot of things you can get into. So we tried to hit kind of the top 2 or 3 key items. And I think one of the biggest ones that, at least from my experience talking with business owners who are actively selling or who are, getting ready to make that decision to sell, is answering this question: what's my business worth? And one of the reasons I think this is an important topic, not just for the obvious reasons of you want to sell it and get some money out of it, is that it seems like every time I have this conversation with an owner, it's not a happy conversation. And the reason is I think folks don't understand a lot of times how a business is valued. One of the most common ways to value a business is just take net earnings, multiply it by a number, and you get a value there. And it's a little bit more to it than that. I've oversimplified it. But Chase, you want to kind of walk us through a little bit about how this net earnings or EBITDA and the multiple, how that drives the value of a business? Kind of educate us a little bit, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So whenever I analyze a business, first of all, we'll take the tax returns, we'll take the profit and loss reports, and we'll look at the balance sheets to see where you're at as far as all the assets in the business go. And kind of step one is to compare those profit and loss reports to the actual tax returns. Sometimes there can be a difference there that, working with the accountant versus what you're kind of reporting on the profit and loss report itself. Some of those differences could be depreciation, could be amortization, depending on how long you own the business. But after looking at your profit and loss reports, because this is what you're generating to keep track of your business, I'll kind of walk through it line item by line item with the business owner and kind of understand it. And it's a process called normalizing those income statements. So to normalize those income statements, you may have some expenses that we call it discretionary expenses that a new buyer may not have. So some of those numbers could change, and sometimes there are multiple business owners. So a new buyer buying that business by themselves, they may look at it like, well, there are multiple business owners, and someone's getting a larger salary than if I were to replace that one business owner with someone with a $60,000 to $80,000 a year salary. So kind of, and I don't want to get right into the weeds, Ed, right off the bat, but just taking those numbers and valuing it from a couple different standpoints, right? It's good to analyze it from a couple different ways. So we'll take those EBITDA values that you referred to, Ed, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and kind of put a multiple on that. And then also on top of the EBITDA values, add back in owner's wages. So, and then that's kind of a separate multiple, and compare those multiples. So,
okay. So what are some, so basically we're taking kind of the net earnings, doing an analysis on that and kind of normalizing that because each business has got some different aspects for how they handle their money. And as we all know, business owners, we're trying to do things to minimize our tax impact. So you kind of factor that in there when you look at what the earnings of the business are. But then we've got to multiply that by some number. So Chase, what are some typical multiples that you see in the business, just to kind of give everybody kind of a bottom line before we get into the details of the multiple?
yeah, absolutely. So what I see primarily is probably anywhere from 2 to 4 times on the net profit.
Okay, so if you got a business that's making a profit of, say, $500,000 a year, just to pick a number, then the business could be worth somewhere between 2 to 4 times that, which is $1 million to $2 million a year, is what you would look to receive for the business. Is that what we're saying?
That's correct. Now,
Okay.
it's a lot more simple with businesses out there that aren't nearly as asset heavy as what this industry is.
Okay.
So, if they don't have a whole lot of assets, that multiple becomes much more justified, what I've found, to a business owner because their investment hasn't been quite as heavy, on the front side throughout the career of the business. Um, in this industry, we all know that you can keep investing, and then even after you've invested, you could feel like you could invest more, and that'd be a benefit to you, make your life easier on a day-to-day basis, right? And then not to mention, the inventory values as well. I think if everybody had the dream shop, would be to have a lot of inventory with 90% of the colors out there, to where once they had the customer in their shop, they didn't ever have to send them anywhere else. So, and not to mention, if anything were to go wrong in the shop, well, now we can go job costs another slab to the job, and remain production on that job so we can get it out on its installation date.
All right. So before we get into the details of multiples, has anybody had a formal valuation done of your business? Any of you guys?
No, have not.
Okay. All right. So this may be new information for pretty much all of you then. All right. That's good to know.
Yeah, I'm a no.
Okay. So Chase, let's talk about some of the things that drive the multiple. There are a number of factors in there. You talked a little bit about inventory and capital and that sort of thing. How do those affect the multiple? If you've got a lot of inventory and a lot of machinery, do you add the value of those to this net earnings times multiple number that you get, or does it just simply influence the multiple, making the multiple higher or lower, respectively?
No, that's a good question, because that multiple number gets thrown around a lot of different ways. And sometimes people are referring to the gross revenue, so the overall volume of the business. Sometimes if you've spoken with a business owner that's talked about a multiple and it's really high, it may have included inventory, and all the equipment plus the profit. So,
Well, I'm trying to figure out how things like the inventory you've got on hand, your capital equipment investment, things like that, do they just impact the multiple? Or do you take earnings times a multiple and then get a number and then add the value of the inventory and the equipment?
right. So again, in this industry, like I said, it can be a little bit more difficult than the average industry, because most industries may not be so asset heavy. So you can take that multiple, multiply it. Now that number appears really good in comparisons to what the assets are. So
So you're kind of looking at the inventory and the equipment as part of what
drives that
drives the
multiple.
business earnings and drives the value. So it becomes really kind of part of the multiple, it sounds like.
100% right.
Okay.
Without
right.
those assets, you're not creating the cash flow of the business, and maybe not without the inventory. And
Okay.
the inventory a lot of times has changed, even from whenever the business is taken to market, in comparisons to whenever, say, 3, 6, 9 months down the road, whenever the sale is actually taking place. That inventory could potentially be fluctuated at that time frame.
Okay.
But yes, if you have machines, if those assets are driving that multiple.
All right. How about if the owner also owns the building and the land? How does that factor into putting a value on the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's great practice. If you're leasing the property, it's already going into the expenses. What a lot of business owners that I see do, they own the real estate as well, and they may have a, 500, 1 million, $1.5 million piece of real estate. And so to put that into perspective, it would be, it's good practice to take what a market rent rate would be on that real estate and have it as an expense towards the business. So, and that'll give you a lot clearer picture as well. If a buyer were to come in, purchase that, and let's say hypothetically you wanted to be the landlord and you wanted to keep that real estate but sell the business, you're going to want to charge them something. If you're not doing that yourself, then it's not affected on your, on your personal books.
Yeah, I know one guy I talked to that sold his business a couple of years ago had just that situation. He wanted to keep the land of the building and lease them back to the owner. And one of the things that the lender required was a long-term lease. So the lender was confident that the buyer of the business had kind of a set rent amount that was not going to fluctuate a whole lot, and they were also secured in having a location they could count on. So the lender tended to kind of get involved in that discussion as well. Is that pretty common?
That's very common. And they're not gonna, they don't want to loan money on a business where they don't have the rights to say, yes, this, we're gonna have this lease for 5 years with an additional option for another 5-year term as well. Most of the time, if you're working with the Small Business Administration, the SBA lenders, they're going to amortize out a business loan more times than not. I mean, it can all fluctuate, right? Depending on if you're buying the value of the real estate, or if you're just buying the business, and depending on what both of those values are. But on the business side, you tend to amortize that out to 10 years. If the real estate is over 51% of the overall value, then what they'll do is kind of take a weighted scale and say, okay, so if I have the overall transaction, let's say it's $2 million and $1.5 million is the real estate, 500 is the business, then maybe we'll amortize that out to say 18 years, 20 years, depending on what that scale is.
Okay. All
Is
right.
it better to separate these out when you're looking at a business and just deal with the businesses separately, deal with the building separately? Because it's two different type of buyers, probably that are going after that.
If you're in the current position of ownership, you're wearing two hats. You may look at it as, I own the real estate, and without this real estate, I don't have a business here. But in the eyes of the lenders and the eyes of everyone else, you're still wearing two hats, and that's why it's important to to charge yourself that market rent rate back to the business. So wear those two hats. Say, I'm actually, even though I own both, I'm the commercial landlord, and if I were to rent this building out, how much would I want to rent it for? And then apply that to the books on the business as well, because that's going to give you a more accurate representation of
Yeah.
what profit is.
Well, we do rent back to the business now, so but it's all in the same ownership group. So
That's that's okay as well. If you have an idea, and then kind of getting outside of just business value, but typically real estate income is taxed at a lower rate than what your ordinary business income would be taxed at. So hypothetically, to separate those entities, this would be something you'd want to check with your your CPA on, but might be able to save you a little bit.
One of the things that I've learned in talking with business owners going through this process is it's not just the seller and the buyer talking and a broker, helping facilitate that conversation. There's a lender that's going to stick their nose in, have their requirements. You've got an attorney that's going to have recommendations they're going to make sometimes, and you've got a CPA that's going to say, hey, from a tax standpoint, you got to look at this. So it ends up being, it can be a really complex process with lots of different moving parts, it sounds like.
There ends up being a lot of people involved in the transaction. So it's not just as simple as, I want to sell my business and it's sold tomorrow. There's a process that goes behind it, but it's what I try to increase, or a business broker does, is try to increase that value as much as possible. Working with the right attorneys if someone doesn't have representation, or working with, the right lenders that be a little bit more familiar with certain industries or certain things. Help that out.
Yeah, and obviously this can be a pretty complex process. We're not going to cover all the ins and outs today, and a lot of weeds we can get into. We want to try to kind of hit the high points and give you a flavor for a few key things to kind of help you get ready for the process. Stephanie, you on the chat, you popped up with a question about valuation and inventory and assets. Did you get the answer that you were looking for that question?
Well, I just want to clarify that I was hearing it correctly. Just as he was speaking to like 2 to 4 times the net earning. And if you were to include inventory and assets in that, then you may do that at a lower multiple. If you were at the higher multiple, then you would consider it as part of what it takes for that net earning to be what it is. And just making sure that I understood that correctly and clearly.
As much as I'd like to, pinpoint anything down, and I hope you can respect this answer, it's really someone needs to analyze what you have, right? I mean, they need to take all things into consideration. And so as much as I'd like to, say this is what you can expect, it can be a little bit more difficult than that. I mean, you're taking all the equipment, you're taking vehicle values, you're taking inventory, you're taking the real estate, you're taking the value of the real estate, you're taking market rents in your area, so, and ultimately at the end of the day, and at a lender, not just myself, but a lender is going to take all those things into consideration as well for the buyer. And they're going to say, well, I don't know what the market multiple is going to be, but let's analyze these 10 variables that affect how this business runs, how it operates, and even outside of the financials, but who this buyer is, what their background is, and now, what's the risk or reward for them to loan out this money, and what is that number? So after all that being said, they're taking a debt to service ratio on what is the cash flow of the business and what is the debt going to be to service everything that I'm going to be purchasing. And am I just going to be purchasing the business, or am I going to be purchasing the business and the real estate, all the inventory right now? So I deal a lot with seller financing, and the reason why is because it can affect that multiple to benefit both buyer and seller today. So their loan isn't as much today, and ultimately the seller's not taking as big of a tax hit, and they may not need all that cash today. So, and these are on a little bit larger businesses where there's a lot of inventory involved. There's to where the numbers won't necessarily they don't work out as much because there is so much, say, assets or inventory. So let's sell 80% of everything right now. You get cash up front, but let's amortize. Let's take the inventory, for example, and sell that as it's needed. And that can be it can be a little bit difficult as well, but I mean, just getting as deep as what you may want to know and what to expect. I mean, seller financing can be very common.
So part of what it sounds like is that, okay, you can run through some sort of valuation, get a number of business value, but the lender may not necessarily want to loan you based on that value. They may want to factor that by some reason. And so if you've got partial or full owner financing with that, it can kind of help drive that multiple up and drive what you ultimately get for the business out of that, it sounds like. So
Right.
Let's look at some factors that drive the multiple, things that you may want to think about, because a lot of these are things that you can influence as you're planning to sell your business in the future. And one of them is, let me get my computer to work here. Come on, guys. Yeah. How much the business relies on the presence of the owner for the business to run. I call that it's kind of like the tall pole in a circus tent, so to speak, is that, if the owner is that long pole in the tent and you pull the owner out of the business and the tent collapses, the business collapses, then you've got a business that's really built around the personality of the owner. versus a business where the owner could disappear for a month and the business is going to continue to run fine. And Chase, is it fair to say that when the business is fully dependent on the owner, the multiple may be lower than if you've got a business where if the owner disappears, goes on vacation for a month or whatever, it still runs well? You get a higher multiple when that business is more independent of the owner. Is that fair?
Yes, I think so. It's a variable that's taken into consideration that would affect that. Absolutely.
Okay. And part of that kind of goes, and this is a term I've heard from business brokers over the years, is a buyer wanting to buy a business or they want to buy a job?
Right.
That kind of goes to this dynamic. Other things like, is your business neat and organized? When a lender walks in, that's going to affect their perception of the business a lot. Things like, what is your competitive advantage? Why would a homeowner or a contractor want to buy from you as opposed to your competitor? If you've got that competitive advantage really well documented, well thought out, it's present in your business, it's pretty obvious, that can impact a multiple too, right, Chase?
Absolutely can. Yes. Profit margins. That's a big one. Business may be doing less gross revenue, but profit margins may be double to triple what other businesses. Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty typical. I like to. This is kind of a loose number. It's not firmly researched, but typically, 10% is a fairly common net in this business. I talked to a lot of businesses that are a lot lower in single digits, 5% or less, which those folks are struggling. But then I run across businesses that are doing, 12, 15, 20, and some even a little bit higher. So if you're in if you're a $4 million a year sales business that's netting 20% versus a $4 million a year sales business that's netting 5%, not only do you have less earnings to multiply to get a valuation, but the multiple will be different as well because the business is performing better. So you kind of alluded to some documents that are needed, Chase. One of the things that, as I've talked with folks that get ready to sell the business, they've been really kind of surprised at how much documentation the seller needs to pull together. And I've got kind of a list here. I'm going to put them all up on screen and just kind of let me get them up on screen, then I'll let you kind of talk to them if you would.
So there are a ton of documents that are needed, and I definitely think it's better to prepare those documents on the front side prior to taking your business to market. One of the biggest reasons why would be just the organization and having those items ready whenever you have a serious buyer. They have, whether they're working with a CPA or who it is, and then to speed that process along as well. What you do not want to do is have a couple people interested. They say, I would like to gather these documents, and it takes you an additional 2-3 weeks a month to prepare those. So I think it's always better to prepare on the front side before actually moving forward. So monthly P&L statements, these are the income statements generated typically by your accounting software that you have in the business there. And these are typically, you need 3 years. And depending on how those industry trends are, you may want to have 5 years. And the reason I say that is because we just went through COVID. There's been a lot of businesses that have varied in those trends, those income trends. It's affected some businesses in a good way, and it's affected others in a not so much good way. So depending on those situations, the banks may say, hey, we'd like to gather another year or 2 on top of the additional 3 years. Same for the balance sheets. 3 years on that, typically 3 years on a tax return. And
they're going to take all of those and kind of balance them against each other and make sure everything lines up, right?
Correct. Compare the P&Ls to the tax returns and kind of compare all those numbers together, which is what I had mentioned a little bit before, and see how separate they are. Generally speaking as well, the tax returns, sometimes banks will actually have you fill out a 4506T form, which is not just the banks pulling your tax returns from me or from you as the business owner, but actually pulling those from the IRS. Say these are what they reported as well. So, and generally speaking, more times than not, the banks will use the tax returns as part of the income. So if you want to kind of go back and hit on valuation a little bit, let's say hypothetically, you're take a trip to Disneyland with a family, and that's a $10,000 trip, and that saves you hypothetically, let's say 25% in taxes at the end of the year. You do that for a 3-year period, so that saved you $7,500 in taxes. When it comes to a valuation standpoint, that 10,000 is multiplied, say, by that three times number, maybe even more, 3 or 4 times. So that 7,500 is now valued at 30 to 40,000 whenever it comes to valuation. And
That's part of that normalization you talked about on net earnings, right?
that is correct. And when I work with a business owner, my goal is to not be unrealistic, but to also pull out those normalizations to where it can increase the value. I mean, my goal is to to be realistic, but again, to sell the business as much as possible it's worth. So yes, and they may have some discrepancy against some of those what we would call add backs, to increase that. Because what you show on the tax returns bottom line will still add back, owner's salary, depreciation in the business, say owner's health insurance, if you're running that through the business, all those items that the new buyer may not have as expense towards the business.
Now, one of the things that I've run into, not often, but I've heard it can happen, is that you've got a business owner owns a fab shop, they own the land of the building, and then they may also own maybe some commercial property that's adjacent, and so they've got that as an investment. And when you start pulling the P&Ls, the balance sheets, tax returns, that sort of thing, you find out that all of this is lumped together. The owner's selling the fab shop, but he doesn't necessarily want to sell that other commercial property or some other business entity that he's kind of rolled up under one umbrella. How does that impact things when you start pulling these financial statements, figuring out earnings and multiples? They've kind of mashed all this together. What kind of problems does that create?
It creates a paperwork nightmare. Nothing's clean, nothing's legible for everybody that's going to be analyzing this, and that could be up to how many different people. It could be multiple, myself, a broker, a different broker that you're interviewing, the banks, and maybe a buyer is going to have, interviewing a couple different lenders as well. So they have 2 lenders involved, the CPA that's working with them just to kind of say, hey, can you mind to double check this for me? If it's not legible, it becomes a very difficult business to sell. So that's why having those clean financials is very, very important. And it may sound like a lot. No, I don't need to worry about it. But if if you're considering selling the business, it's very important. So what I've actually done with a lot of business owners, and they've been running everything as a combined group, all their different income streams into, say, the business. They've actually had to go back to the CPA and separate out all those documents. And the CPA has gone through their bank statements for the last 3 years and regenerate accurate profit and loss reports. So and now there's a separation between the profit and loss reports and what you actually showed on the tax returns. So it's cleaner now, but it's still not quite as clean as if it was done right on the first time, and now the tax return is based off of that, whatever it was done the first time.
Yeah, so that I would imagine that when there's a letter of intent, and we'll talk about that process in a minute, where a prospective buyer wants to start looking at the valuation of the business and looking at all these documents, and then a lender takes a look at it, and all of a sudden you've got to do a pause, sort all this stuff out, regenerate P&Ls, balance sheets, et cetera. I would imagine that probably causes a lender probably some pause and could possibly affect what they're willing to lend on the purchase, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So these are really, when you start looking at this documentation, these are things that as you are looking down the road of selling your business, getting all this stuff in order today, so that if you're thinking of selling 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, saves you a lot of hassle, saves you the additional expense of a CPA or somebody sorting all this out, and can impact what the final selling price of the business is and how easy it is to put the deal together. So those are really critical, and it's part of the planning that I like to encourage owners to do when I'm talking with them about, if you're looking at exit strategy anytime in the next 5 years, give or take, this is what you got to have set up. I still get shocked with even $5 to $10 million fabricators that I talk to that just don't do monthly P&Ls. I get shocked when I run into that, and so folks who are not doing that at all have got to start doing that, because trying to recreate those after the fact are expensive, tough. You can't get it right, and it will impact the value of your business and what a lender will own. So, all right. We got about 15 minutes left. Let me do a quick pause. I got some additional thoughts to kind of wrap this up, but before I do, let me see if anybody's got any questions. We've thrown some lingo around. We've covered a lot of stuff. Any questions you guys have got? Anything that's not clear, we need to go back and clarify.
Yeah, I think I stepped out for a quick second when you were going over one of the biggest multiplier factors being, the involvement of the owner, and how well the business can run without the owner.
Yep.
Can you just expand on that for a quick sec and really, what that looks like, for smaller shops, sub 2 million shops that, where the owner's pretty much doing most of the heavy lifting all the time. How does a guy like that, prepare to, ever, look at selling?
It's a great question. Chase, how would you answer that one?
I think a lot of that's going to be dependent whenever you're at a smaller shop like that, say $2 million, and you have a lot of it will be dependent on the profit margin. So that $2 million, if you're a company that's profiting 5%, that's $100,000. And at the end of the day, that's all the profits that the business or cash flow is being generated by the business, right? So you can look at that as that's 100% of the salary being taken. Now you're a business that's profiting, say 20, 25%. And you can hypothetically say, if I wanted to replace myself with a position and they're going to do, 80% of the work that you're, say, putting in right now, 100,000, that profit is 20%. Well, now there's a lot of money left on the table to say, yeah, I have someone that's doing my job and I kind of still oversee everything, but I'm not the guy that's doing the sales and then taking that sale, going out to template the next day, programming the job, and then ultimately pulling in for installers as well whenever they're not, showing up.
So if you've got a $2 million business and netting 5%, that's going to be it's a tougher sell. It's also tougher from a valuation standpoint. But if you got one that's netting a $2 million business netting, say 25%, then now you've got a lot of additional cash that a prospective buyer can say, all right, I can take some of that cash and hire a salesperson, hire a templater, and I can learn to run, the day-to-day ops part of the business and eventually work myself out of it. There's a little more for a potential buyer to work with than if, say, the business is only netting 5%.
Man, are you looking at, does it matter if on your reporting, are you looking at cash basis or accrual basis, or does it matter?
The majority of businesses in this industry are accrual basis. They're not pizza shops that come in, they give them cash today, and then they walk out the door and the job's done. They'll give you the deposit, and so the majority of these industries are accrual basis.
Well,
It depends on your
and when you're looking at 3 to 5 years of what are the patterns for the business, which is part of what you're looking at with all this financial analysis and all these financial statements, they're looking at the, what's the long-term trend. So cash versus accrual is not quite as critical when you start looking at that. Courtney, you look like you raised your hand. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Thank you.
Yeah, I did. So I just had a question about net earnings. The way we do our business, we're a corporation, so we pay ourselves, a W-2, me and my brother, but we do take draws from the business, and ultimately that kind of comes out of the net earnings. So when you're using the net earnings to, as part of that calculation, do you subtract those draws first, or do you leave those in when you calculate the net earnings?
So it sounds like you're an S corporation, filing as an LLC as well?
Yeah, we're S corp, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there will be on your tax return, there will be I believe it's a K1.
Yeah, K1, yeah.
Yep. And that just shows the distribution of the owner's earnings on there, which will be factored back to a term called seller's discretionary earnings, which are EBITDA plus the owner's earnings. It'll still be taken into consideration at those distributions.
Okay.
Did I answer that right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I get it.
Yeah.
James, going back to your question as well.
So sticking with that $2 million company, staying with that $2 million company, it's an S corp, and let's say there's 2 owners, and those owners, again, they get a salary, the health insurance, and all of that. How is that figured into that bottom line? Is that added back in, or?
Yes, it could be added back in. One way to do that would be to take, depending on what the owner's salaries are, if they're above, market value, to replace that owner as a normal employee, then the difference, could be added back in.
And if those employees if the owners didn't need to be replaced, let's say there's systems in place that, they're just kind of there, able to leave for a month. So it's not really a replacement thing. Does that become more valuable then, as far as those salaries?
Yeah, I mean, if you can prove that you're not working in the business a lot, there's a ton of profit left over, you're paying yourself a certain amount of money, and the business is still performing very well, and I definitely think it's going to be more valuable. A lot of that's going to depend on the buyer as well, right? So everybody could have a different viewpoint on the situation. Sometimes they may be from the industry, and sometimes they may not. So it could affect how a buyer views the business as well. That's not just for this industry. That'd be for all industries.
How do you find that buyer? Especially if you're in a small market, you don't want word out there. You're basically opening books, which I guess you'd have an NDA on it or something like that if they look at it. But still, how do you find that buyer without just kind of spreading it out in the industry? And
that's a great question. Let's say this is probably what brings the majority of value to what a business broker does outside of marketing it on, say, the MLS and just publicly marketing it, right? Business brokers don't tend to do near as many deals as what a residential real estate agent would. It's much more time consuming. I work with a larger company called First Choice Business Brokers, and I think our database is, they say it's millions of people. So depending on what what industry you're in, you can do direct mail marketing. You can do email marketing. We market it to different business platforms. People are actively looking to purchase a business. And as far as the confidentiality side goes, create three different steps. So just kind of like a one-page business overview. And it won't have the business name, the location, anything like that, other than a general location. And the general location will even be signed off by the business owner when taken to market, um, as to how I'm going to advertise it. So, for instance, if you're in a super small market, you may want to market it to 3 or 4 different counties as opposed to one city where there are 30 different fabricators.
4
It
counties
may
is
not
our
be as
entire state.
right.
I'm guessing there's not too
Hawaii's
many shops in Kauai.
Yeah, Hawaii's a little unique in that respect. Yeah.
Right.
Although, you advertise Hawaii business for sale on the mainland, that could have its own draw in itself, couldn't it?
It could.
Yeah. So I think sound like the short answer is that because, if you're working with a broker, then the broker has got mechanisms for making that business visible, helping advertise it. And Chase, it sounds like you guys have got ways to do that to sort of protect the identity of the business. So, a guy like Norbert's not too worried about his customers running and, jumping ship, or his employees jumping ship, right?
That's the overall goal. Yeah, I
Yep.
mean, that's the goal depending on what situation you're in.
So do you guys work like typical real estate, where they do with 6% commissions, and which are everything's negotiable? What are fees normally on business brokerage?
Absolutely. So I work off of kind of a sliding scale depending on what the value of the business is. And typical fees, I would say, uh, range from say, roughly 6 to 15%. And kind of right there in the middle is, I would say, the majority of the time.
All right, we're getting close to our top of the hour. I would like to kind of wrap up the first hour, and then again, we'll keep this open for 20 or 30 minutes. Let me hit a couple of just a few closing thoughts to kind of round this out a little bit. So one thing I think it's important is that typically buyers are more educated about this process than sellers. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to start getting some of this information out there is that as I have talked with business owners wanting to sell their business, they don't understand a lot of things we've covered in the last hour. And as you can probably tell, listening to the Chase, there's even more information out there that's really important. That's good to know. And a lot of times a buyer will be really, really well educated because they will have studied and learned and asked questions, and they're prepared. And it doesn't mean they necessarily have an advantage, but I think it's important for a prospective seller to get educated on the process so that you don't get surprised. I've talked to business owners who have been through this process, and they've been shocked at how much work it was and that sort of thing. So I think, preparing for that now is really important. We've talked about the documentation that's needed. Obviously, if you want to change how well your business runs without you, that's not an overnight change. That's something that you can do to impact your multiple. If you want to make changes to drive your net earnings up, impact that EBITDA number, that's obviously not an overnight change. So those are things to start with now that are really important if you think, as you prepare for whatever life after this business looks like for you. And so a good game plan is to have a goal. What is it you want to do when you're not doing this business anymore? And start to put some numbers around, all right, if I want to travel and I want to go, let's say I've been, drooling over the Viking cruises brochure, and I want to do every cruise they've got for every river in Europe, something like that. Well, you can sit down and figure out, okay, the penthouse suite for those things costs X number of dollars, and the flights, and you can start putting some numbers around this stuff. If you want to go play the great golf courses of the world because you love golf, what are the greens fees at St. Andrews? What's it cost to stay there? You can start putting numbers around this kind of thing, plus your regular living expenses, and figure out what it is you need to net from the sale of your business. That gives you that goal, that objective. It puts a number on it that's something that's tangible. And then if you take the information you got here today, or you talk to somebody like Chase and do a formal valuation, get the current value of your business. And so what that does is now you've got a current value, you've got a desired sales price, a desired value you'd like to have. Figure out your time frame. Do you want to do that in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? What's that look like? So now you've got a metric business value that you can track. You've got a time frame, and you can start to put together that game plan to get you where you want to go. And I think that's really important to have that thought process and begin that planning process now. That's really critical, because as you can tell, hopefully from the last hour, jumping into the sale of a business is much more complex than selling a house or a car, anything like that. It can take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of things you got to do. And you can influence what that sales price is. So that's important to look at. Something else I think will help you out as well is that, like I said earlier, we've only covered a few topics here. One of the things that I've done, Chase was nice enough to sit down with me, and we recorded 3 podcast episodes where we kind of did a deeper dive into some of these factors in those podcast episodes. If you hit they're on fabricatorscoach.com, and they're also on any of your normal podcast platforms that you listen to. If you hit the Fabricators Coach podcast, you can pick these up. We preceded those 3 episodes with Chase by 3 episodes with a guy named Aaron Crowley. If you don't know Aaron, he owned a fab shop for over 20 years, sold it a couple of years ago. We talked through his experience in selling the shop and what he went through. He was almost totally unprepared, and a lot of the things we've talked about that could be challenges, he ran into those and more. Aaron's also the guy who developed the no-lift install cart, so you may have heard his name from there. But the 3 episodes from Aaron have already been posted, and then I think the episodes with Chase, I don't know the timing on those offhand, but I think the first one may be up, or if not, it'll be up in the next week or 2. And we're putting those out about every 2 weeks, so you can go through those 6 episodes, give you a good idea to get a little bit deeper dive. And then obviously, if you have additional questions for Chase, we've got his contact information here on screen. Let's see, we've got mobile and office numbers, and then you can see his email address is chase.busenbark@fcbb.com. And FCBB for podcast listeners is First Choice Business Brokers. So you can email him there and hit him at these phone numbers. But I want to, before I wrap this up, Chase, any final comments?
I'd be more than happy to talk with whoever may want to do a potential value. I don't typically charge anything for this, to have the conversation, to analyze things, and just kind of give you, some quick feedback as far as that goes. I mean, to get into, real valuations and very, very in-depth level valuations. There's sometimes $1,500, $2,000 price points, depending, to do things like that. But I think the overall goal is that, if you're considering something in the next 5 years, is kind of do a check on the business and see where you would like to be. Ed hit on those points that what are you going to do after the fact? And, do you have a goal in mind? Which brings me to one of the biggest reasons that people sell is just because of burnout. They've been doing something for so long, and that's the reason why they're just ready for a change of life, other than the, what I would call the dismal Ds, whether that's partnership dissolution, death, disease, divorce, any other factors that kind of blindside you into selling your business more promptly than if you're preparing to sell. So I'd be happy to walk with you through those things. I think it's important to do a couple years, 2-3 years, and even, if you're still in the building process, 5 years out, so you can have that hypothetical number in mind. So one of the guys had mentioned that how are valuations affected? Businesses are typically sold off the historical cash flow of the business, which is where a lot of business owners, well, it has the potential to do this, and if I were to land this other cabinet maker, we'd have the potential to do this. I think the main thing that you should take away is if it has that potential, it's good to put that potential in place that you see fit prior to the selling your business, because then it will affect that multiple, and it'll affect the valuation of your business overall from a historical standpoint.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Chase. We've run over just a few minutes, and I apologize for folks who've had other things scheduled, but do want to thank you for taking time out of your Thursday. Hope this has been helpful for you. If you've got questions, comments, you can contact either one of us. Again, thanks for joining us here on the webinar.